Journey into the scorching deserts and bloodied battlefields of the 12th century to witness the rise of Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, the Kurdish warrior who would become Islam's greatest champion. From a childhood spent in the shadows of crumbling caliphates to the throne that united a fractured Muslim world, this is the story of Saladin, the man who reclaimed Jerusalem, humbled Crusader kings, and forged a legacy so powerful that even his enemies called him the most chivalrous warrior who ever lived. But before the legend, before the glory, there was only a boy standing in the ruins of a dying empire, wondering if he would survive to see tomorrow. They say when Saladin died, 3 coins remained in his treasury. 3 coins. The man who had commanded armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, who ruled from Egypt to Syria, who brought the mightiest Crusader kingdom to its knees, died with nothing. But that's not the mystery. The mystery is this. How does a nobody, a Kurdish boy with no claim to power, no royal blood, no army of his own, rise to become the Sultan who would be remembered for 1,000 years? How does a man forge an empire from dust and ashes? And why, when he finally stood at the gates of Jerusalem, holding the lives of every Christian soul in his hands, did he show them mercy when they had shown none to his people 88 years before? Stay with me, because the answer to these questions will take us from the burning sands of Tikrit to the golden courts of Damascus, from the blood-soaked walls of Jerusalem to the deathbed where a legend took his final breath. This is not just history. This is the forging of a soul. Segment 1. Before the legend, life in the shadows. The year is 1138. The Muslim world is dying. Not quickly, not cleanly, but slowly, like a great body bleeding from 1,000 cuts. The Abbasid Caliphate, once the crown jewel of Islamic civilization, has become a hollow shell. Its caliphs sit powerless in Baghdad, puppets controlled by Turkish warlords. The Seljuk Empire, which once stretched from Anatolia to Persia, has splintered into squabbling emirates and sultanates, each ruler more concerned with fighting his Muslim brothers than defending against the Frankish invaders who have carved bloody kingdoms into the heart of Syria and Palestine. Jerusalem, the third holiest city in Islam, has been in Crusader hands for nearly 4 decades. Christian knights walk where the Prophet once ascended to heaven. Churches stand where mosques once called the faithful to prayer. And the Muslim princes do nothing. They bicker. They scheme. They make deals with the Franks to gain advantage over each other. The unity that once made Islam unstoppable is gone, shattered into a million pieces. Into this broken world, in the fortress town of Tikrit along the Tigris River, a boy is born. His name is Yusuf. His family calls him Salah ad-Din, righteousness of the faith. But there is nothing righteous about the world he enters. There is only survival. Tikrit is a garrison town, all dust and stone and the constant sound of horses. The citadel rises above the river like a fist, its walls thick enough to withstand siege, its towers manned by soldiers who have known nothing but war their entire lives. Yusuf's father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, is the commander of this fortress, a Kurdish warrior in service to Imad ad-Din Zengi, the Turkish Atabeg who rules Mosul and dreams of uniting the Muslim world. But Ayyub is not a man of ambition. He is a man of duty, stern and pious, who teaches his sons that power is temporary but honor is eternal. Yusuf's uncle, Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, is different. Where Ayyub is cautious, Shirkuh is bold. Where Ayyub preaches restraint, Shirkuh thirsts for glory. He is a warrior through and through, thick-chested and fierce, with a laugh that echoes through the halls and a sword arm that has broken enemy formations from Damascus to Aleppo. The soldiers love him, fear him, follow him, and young Yusuf watches everything. The boy's childhood is not one of comfort. The fortress is cold at night, even in summer. The wind howls through the narrow windows, carrying with it the stench of the river and the camps below. Yusuf sleeps on a simple mat, eats barley bread and dried dates, learns to endure hunger during the long fasts of Ramadan. This is not the soft life of a prince. This is the life of a warrior clan, where weakness means death and strength means survival. Every morning before dawn, Yusuf rises for prayer. The call of the muezzin pulls him from sleep, and he stands with his father and brothers in the mosque, forehead pressed to the cold stone, reciting verses from the Quran. His father teaches him that a Muslim warrior fights not for glory or gold, but for Allah and the defense of the faithful. That the sword is an instrument of justice, not murder. That mercy is the mark of true strength. But the world outside the mosque walls tells a different story. Yusuf is only a boy when he first sees death. A raiding party returns to Tikrit carrying the body of a soldier, a young man barely older than his teenage brothers, killed by Crusader knights during a skirmish near the Syrian border. They lay the body in the courtyard, and Yusuf stares at the wound across the man's chest, the way the blood has dried black against his tunic, the way his eyes are still open, staring at nothing. His father places a hand on his shoulder and says simply, "This is what we face. This is why we must be ready." Ready for what? Yusuf does not yet know, but he begins his training. The training is brutal. Every day, he drills with wooden swords until his arms burn and his hands blister. He learns to ride before he can fully walk a straight line with a blade, learns to control a horse with his knees so his hands remain free for bow and spear. He learns the Turkic style of mounted archery, firing arrows at targets while galloping at full speed, the rhythm of the horse's hooves matching the draw of the bowstring. He fails constantly, falls, gets back up, falls again. His uncle Shirkuh watches these training sessions with amusement. The boy is soft, he tells Ayyub one evening, loud enough for Yusuf to hear. He thinks too much. A warrior acts. But Ayyub shakes his head. He is not soft. He is careful. That is different. The world has enough reckless men. It needs more who think. Yusuf does think. Too much, perhaps. While his brothers boast about the enemies they will kill and the cities they will conquer, Yusuf watches. He studies the older warriors, learns their stories, asks questions. Why did this battle succeed and that one fail? Why do some men command loyalty while others inspire only fear? What makes a kingdom strong? What tears it apart? The answer, he begins to realize, is unity. Or rather, the lack of it. He is 12 years old when his father is forced to flee Tikrit. A political intrigue, a failed plot against the local governor, details that blur with time. What matters is that overnight, the family loses everything. The fortress, the security, the future. They become refugees, traveling west with whatever they can carry, dependent on the mercy of Zengi, the warlord who had employed Ayyub. Zengi takes them in, grants Ayyub a position in Damascus, and the family begins again. Damascus, the city of jasmine and poetry, of scholars and traders, of minarets that pierce the sky like lances. It is a world away from the harsh frontier life of Tikrit. But it is also a city under threat, surrounded by Crusader states. Its survival dependent on the strength of men like Zengi and the cunning of viziers who play Christian against Muslim, kingdom against kingdom, just to survive another year. Yusuf is old enough now to understand what his father had been teaching him. The Muslim world is not losing because the Crusaders are stronger. It is losing because it is divided. Every emir wants to be a king. Every king wants to be a sultan. And while they fight each other, the Franks advance. He trains harder, studies warfare, history, theology. He learns to read the great military treatises, memorizes the campaigns of Alexander and the early Muslim conquerors. He learns diplomacy, watching how his father navigates the treacherous politics of Damascus, how a well-chosen word can prevent a war and a careless one can start it. He learns patience, and he learns to wait. Because in 1144, something happens that changes everything. Zengi captures Edessa, the first major Crusader city to fall back into Muslim hands. The news spreads like wildfire. Muslims rejoice. Christians panic. A new crusade is called. And in Damascus, a young man named Yusuf ibn Ayyub realizes that the tide might finally be turning. But Zengi is assassinated 2 years later by his own slave, and the moment seems lost. His son Nur ad-Din inherits Aleppo and continues the fight, but the dream of unity remains distant. Yusuf is 17 now, still unknown, still unproven, just another young officer in Shirkuh's retinue. He has no lands, no wealth, no army. He has only his name, his faith, and a growing conviction that Allah has a purpose for him, something greater than he can yet imagine. The nights in Damascus are long. Yusuf lies awake in his room, listening to the distant sound of the city, merchants closing their shops, guards changing watch, the call to prayer echoing from 100 minarets. He thinks about Jerusalem, the city he has never seen but dreams about constantly. He thinks about the divisions tearing apart the Muslim world. He thinks about his father's words. Mercy is the mark of true strength. And somewhere deep in his chest, a fire begins to burn. Not the hot, reckless fire of ambition, but the steady, enduring fire of purpose. He does not know it yet, but this fire will never go out. It will carry him through 20 years of warfare, through betrayals and victories, through the conquest of Egypt and the unification of Syria, through the liberation of Jerusalem and the respect of his enemies. It will make him a legend. But tonight, he is just Yusuf, a young man lying in the darkness, waiting for his moment. And the moment is coming. Segment 2. Rise of the Warrior, the Path to Glory. The year is 1164. Yusuf is 26 years old, and he is standing at the edge of destiny. Egypt is collapsing. The Fatimid Caliphate, once a rival power to the Abbasids, has become a rotting corpse, its child caliph controlled by scheming viziers, its treasury empty, its army in shambles. Both the Muslims of Syria and the Christian Crusaders see the opportunity. Whoever controls Egypt controls its wealth, its strategic position, and the future of the entire region. The race is on. Nur ad-Din, now the undisputed leader of Muslim Syria, sends Yusuf's uncle Shirkuh to Egypt with an army. His mission: prevent the Crusaders from taking Cairo and bring Egypt under Syrian control. Shirkuh demands that Yusuf accompany him. Yusuf refuses. He does not want to go to Egypt. He is comfortable in Damascus, studying, serving in minor administrative roles, living the life of a scholar-soldier. Egypt means war, chaos, uncertainty. He tells his uncle no. Shirkuh drags him anyway. You will thank me one day, the old warrior growls. Now stop whining and mount your horse. It is the most important moment of Yusuf's life, and he does not even know it. The first Egyptian campaign is a nightmare. Shirkuh's army is outnumbered, caught between the Fatimid forces and a Crusader army led by King Amalric of Jerusalem. They fight a series of inconclusive battles, barely survive a siege at Alexandria where Yusuf commands the defense with unexpected skill, and finally withdraw back to Syria, having achieved nothing but survival. It is a failure. But Yusuf has learned something crucial. He is good at this. Not just fighting, but leading. The soldiers in Alexandria followed him not because of his bloodline, but because of his calm in crisis, his fairness, his courage. Shirkuh notices. Nur ad-Din notices. And when another opportunity arises in Egypt 3 years later, Yusuf is no longer a reluctant participant. He is Shirkuh's second in command. The second campaign is more successful. Shirkuh's forces enter Cairo as supposed allies of the Fatimid Vizier, but everyone knows the truth. This is a conquest. When the Vizier dies, murdered, most suspect, Shirkuh is appointed in his place. He is now the power behind the Fatimid throne, ruling Egypt in all but name, while the teenage caliph sits powerless in his palace. Shirkuh dies 2 months later. Heart failure. Too many years of warfare and feasting. And in the chaos that follows, the Fatimid court looks for a successor. They choose Yusuf, expecting him to be weak, easy to control, a puppet. They choose wrong. At 29 years old, Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub becomes Vizier of Egypt. And he will never relinquish power again. The first years are a tightrope walk over an abyss. The Fatimid court despises him, seeing him as a Sunni outsider controlling their Shia caliphate. The soldiers are suspicious, many loyal to the old regime. Crusader armies threaten from the north. Nur ad-Din watches from Syria, expecting obedience and tribute. And Yusuf is caught in the middle, with limited resources and enemies on all sides. But he does not panic. He moves carefully, methodically, like a chess player thinking 10 moves ahead. First, he secures the army. He promotes competent officers regardless of their background, pays the soldiers regularly from his own diminishing funds, and leads them personally in battles against the Crusaders. When King Amalric and a Byzantine fleet attack Damietta, Yusuf's defense is so fierce that the Christians withdraw with heavy losses. The soldiers begin to trust him. Second, he eliminates the internal threats. When the Fatimid palace troops, the elite Sudanese and Armenian guards loyal to the old caliph, attempt a rebellion, Yusuf crushes them without mercy. The palace is purged. The caliph becomes a pure figurehead. Yusuf is now the true ruler of Egypt in all but name. Third, he begins to reshape Egypt itself. He strengthens the fortifications of Cairo, builds a massive citadel on the Mokattam Hills that will dominate the city for centuries, reorganizes the tax system to rebuild the treasury, and slowly, carefully, begins to shift Egypt from Shia to Sunni Islam. When the Fatimid Caliph finally dies in 1171, Yusuf does not appoint a successor. Instead, he orders the Friday prayers to be read in the name of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. The Fatimid Caliphate, after more than 200 years, simply ceases to exist, and nobody stops him. Nur ad-Din expects Yusuf to send Egypt's wealth to Syria, to serve as his loyal subordinate. Yusuf sends some tribute, but keeps most of Egypt's resources for himself. The relationship grows tense. Letters fly back and forth between Cairo and Damascus, each more pointed than the last. Nur ad-Din begins to assemble an army, preparing to invade Egypt and bring his wayward vassal to heel. But in 1174, Nur ad-Din dies suddenly, and the political landscape explodes. Nur ad-Din's heir is a child. The Syrian emirs immediately begin fighting over the succession. Damascus, Aleppo, Mosul, all the cities Nur ad-Din had united, fracture again into competing factions. And in Cairo, Yusuf ibn Ayyub sees his opportunity. He marches north with an army. He tells everyone he is coming to protect Nur ad-Din's young son, to preserve unity, to defend against the Crusaders. And perhaps he even believes it at first. But when he enters Damascus in triumph, when the people line the streets to welcome the man who rules Egypt, when the emirs bow before him, the truth becomes clear. This is no longer about being a vizier or a subordinate. This is about power. And Yusuf, Saladin, as the world is beginning to call him, intends to take it. Over the next dozen years, Saladin fights battle after battle, not against the Crusaders, but against his fellow Muslims. He conquers Aleppo, besieges Mosul, brings Damascus fully under his control, eliminates rivals, absorbs their armies, forms alliances through marriage and diplomacy. It is exhausting, brutal work, fighting men who should be his allies, uniting a fractured world through a combination of military force and political genius. And always, he frames it as necessary, not for personal ambition, but for the greater goal, the liberation of Jerusalem. He cannot fight the Crusaders, he argues, while the Muslims are divided. Unity must come first, and if unity requires that he hold all the power, then so be it. By 1186, he has succeeded. From Egypt to Syria to northern Mesopotamia, Saladin rules an empire. The scattered emirates are united under one banner, one army, one leader, and finally, he can turn his attention to Jerusalem. The provocation comes from Reynald of Chatillon, the most brutal of the Crusader lords, who breaks a truce by attacking a Muslim caravan and refusing to return the prisoners or treasure. Saladin swears an oath. He will kill Reynald with his own hands. And in July 1187, he leads his army west toward the Crusader kingdom. The armies meet at the Horns of Hattin, a barren plateau above the Sea of Galilee. The Crusaders, led by King Guy of Jerusalem, are lured into a trap. Saladin's forces surround them, cut them off from water, and under the brutal summer sun, the greatest Crusader army ever assembled in the East begins to die of thirst. The battle is a slaughter. The Crusaders, exhausted and dehydrated, break under the Muslim assault. King Guy is captured. Reynald of Chatillon is brought before Saladin in chains. Saladin offers Reynald water. Reynald drinks, and then Saladin reminds him of the oath. He draws his sword, and with one stroke, fulfills his promise. Reynald dies in the tent, his blood soaking into the carpet. King Guy watches in horror, certain he will be next. But Saladin sheathes his sword and says, "A king does not kill a king. You will be ransomed." Because that is who Saladin has become. Not just a conqueror, but a man of his word. A man who understands that mercy can be a weapon as sharp as any blade. With the Crusader army destroyed, the path to Jerusalem is open. City after city falls. Acre, Jaffa, Ascalon. The Crusader kingdom collapses like a house of cards. And on September 20th, 1187, Saladin's army arrives at the walls of Jerusalem. The city is defended by a handful of knights and thousands of terrified civilians. They know what happened when the Crusaders took Jerusalem 88 years ago. They massacred everyone. Muslims, Jews, even Eastern Christians. The streets ran with blood for days. Now the roles are reversed, and the Christians expect the same fate. But Saladin remembers his father's words. Mercy is the mark of true strength. When the city surrenders after a brief siege, Saladin offers terms, a ransom for freedom. Those who can pay will be released. Those who cannot will become slaves, unless they can find someone to pay for them. And then Saladin does something that shocks the world. He begins paying ransoms himself. Thousands of them. Poor people who cannot afford their freedom are released anyway, because Saladin and his officers pay for them with their own money. The Christians walk out of Jerusalem alive. The churches are converted to mosques, but they are not destroyed. The Christian holy sites are preserved. Even the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the most sacred Christian site in the world, is protected. Balian of Ibelin, the knight who negotiated the surrender, later writes, Saladin kept his word in all things. When we took Jerusalem, we killed until the horses waded in blood. When Saladin retook it, not one person was killed. The Muslim world erupts in celebration. Jerusalem, lost for nearly a century, is free. Saladin's name is chanted in mosques from Cordoba to Baghdad. He is no longer just a sultan. He is the champion of Islam, the new Nur ad-Din, perhaps even the new Umar ibn al-Khattab, the companion of the Prophet who first brought Jerusalem under Muslim rule. But Saladin knows the fight is not over. The loss of Jerusalem will bring a new crusade, the greatest one yet. And he is right. Within months, the Pope calls the Third Crusade. The kings of Europe take the cross. Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, Frederick Barbarossa of Germany, the most powerful rulers in Christendom are coming to take back the Holy Land. And Saladin, exhausted, his treasury depleted from years of war and the ransoming of thousands of Christian prisoners, must prepare to face them. The Kurdish boy from Tikrit has become a legend. But legends must still fight, and the hardest battles are yet to come. Segment 3. Myths, Secrets, and Unsolved Mysteries. There is a sword. Or rather, there was. Maybe there still is, hidden somewhere beneath the sands of Syria or locked in a forgotten vault in Cairo. Nobody knows for certain. But the legend persists, whispered by historians and treasure hunters alike, the sword of Saladin. Some say it was a curved saber with a blade forged from Damascus steel, inscribed with verses from the Quran. Others claim it was a straight sword, taken from a defeated Crusader knight and blessed by a holy man. Some even insist that it was never just one sword but several, each representing a different phase of his life, buried with him or distributed among his descendants. The mystery deepens because no one knows for certain where Saladin is buried. Oh, there is a tomb in Damascus, a mausoleum next to the Umayyad Mosque, and tourists visit it every day. But scholars have long questioned whether the body inside is truly his. The tomb was renovated multiple times over the centuries. The original grave was disturbed, and in a region where dynasties rise and fall like desert storms, where conquerors build their reputations on the bones of their predecessors, can we really trust that a tomb from the 12th century remains undisturbed? What we do know is this. Saladin was a man who lived surrounded by omens and prophecies, a man whose life seemed guided by something beyond mere politics and warfare. His contemporaries saw him as blessed, perhaps even chosen, and the legends that grew around him transformed him from a historical figure into something closer to myth. Consider the night before the Battle of Hattin. According to multiple chroniclers, Saladin spent the hours before dawn in prayer, prostrating himself before Allah, weeping as he begged for victory. His commanders found him in his tent, face pressed to a prayer rug, his voice hoarse from recitation. He told them he had seen a vision, the Prophet Muhammad himself, standing among the Muslim ranks, blessing the army. Some say the Prophet spoke to him directly, promising that Jerusalem would be delivered into his hands if his intentions remained pure. Was it real? A dream? A politically convenient story spread to motivate the troops? We will never know. But the men who fought at Hattin believed it was real, and they fought with the fury of those who think God is watching. Then there is the mystery of the relic. After Saladin captured Jerusalem, the Crusaders pleaded for one thing above all else: the true cross, the relic that supposedly contained wood from the actual cross of Christ, which had been captured at Hattin and paraded through the streets of Damascus upside down as an insult. It was the most holy object in Christendom, worth more than cities, more than kingdoms. Richard the Lionheart himself later offered enormous sums to ransom it. Saladin refused. But what happened to the true cross? It disappears from history after 1187. Some say Saladin kept it as a trophy. Others claim he destroyed it, unwilling to let such a powerful symbol remain in the world. Still others whisper that he returned it secretly to the Christians, a gesture of respect that was never recorded because it would have been too controversial for either side to admit. In Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there is a quiet chapel where some believe the relic is hidden, sealed behind stone, waiting for a day when the world is ready to receive it again. But this is speculation, myth, the kind of story that grows in the fertile soil of the unknown. What is certain is that Saladin was a man shaped by the mysticism of his age. He lived in a world where dreams were taken as seriously as intelligence reports, where holy men wielded influence equal to generals, where signs and portents could change the course of battles. He consulted Sufi mystics, scholars of Islamic jurisprudence, astrologers who read the movements of stars and planets. When he made major decisions, he often secluded himself for days, fasting and praying, seeking divine guidance. One story tells of a dervish, a wandering holy man, who appeared at Saladin's court in Cairo shortly after he became vizier. The man was filthy, dressed in rags, speaking in riddles. The guards wanted to throw him out, but Saladin insisted on meeting him. The dervish supposedly told Saladin, "You will unite what is broken. You will return what is lost. But you will die owning nothing, and your sons will lose everything you have built. This is the price of righteousness." Saladin gave the man gold and sent him away. Years later, when everything the dervish predicted had come to pass, people remembered the story. Had it actually happened? Or did someone invent it after the fact, a way to make sense of Saladin's tragic irony, that he won everything and kept nothing? Archaeological mysteries surround him as well. In 1898, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany visited Damascus and was so moved by Saladin's legacy that he donated a new marble sarcophagus and a bronze wreath to honor him. The original wooden coffin was set aside, but when scholars examined it, they found inscriptions that did not match the known dates of Saladin's death. Some researchers believe the coffin was made years after his burial, part of an early restoration. Others think it suggests the body was moved at some point, perhaps during one of the many invasions that swept through Damascus in the centuries after Saladin's death. There is also the matter of the treasure. Saladin ruled an empire that stretched across two of the wealthiest regions in the medieval world, Egypt and Syria. His armies collected tribute from dozens of cities. He controlled trade routes that brought goods from Africa, Asia, and Europe. And yet, when he died, his treasury was empty. 3 coins. That is what remained. Where did it all go? Most historians agree that Saladin spent his wealth on his armies, on building fortifications, on bribes and diplomacy, and especially on the ransoming of Christian prisoners after Jerusalem fell. He was famously generous, giving away money to scholars, to the poor, to anyone who asked. His officials complained constantly that he was bankrupting the state. He did not care, but some wonder if there was more to it. Did Saladin hide wealth somewhere? A secret cache meant to fund future campaigns? Did he send treasure to allies or family members for safekeeping? Wealth that was lost when his empire fragmented after his death? Or was he truly so indifferent to money that he let it all slip through his fingers like sand? And then there are the letters. Saladin corresponded with everyone: Muslim rulers, Crusader kings, the Abbasid Caliph, scholars, poets, spies. Thousands of letters must have been written during his reign. Only a fraction survive. What secrets are contained in the ones that were lost? Did he negotiate with the Crusaders in private, making deals that would have scandalized his own followers? Did he express doubts, fears, regrets that never made it into the public chronicles written by his admirers? One tantalizing fragment exists in a Crusader chronicle. It claims that Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, after months of brutal warfare during the Third Crusade, developed a grudging respect for each other. Richard even supposedly proposed that his sister marry Saladin's brother, uniting the Crusader and Muslim states through alliance. The negotiations fell apart, but the idea was apparently discussed seriously. Richard and Saladin never met face to face. Warfare and protocol made it impossible. But they exchanged gifts, fruit, horses, messages of mutual admiration. And some historians believe that if circumstances had been different, they might have found a way to peace. But the documents that would prove this, if they ever existed, are gone, lost to time, burned in sieges, rotting in forgotten libraries. And so the relationship between these two legendary warriors remains a mystery, existing in that hazy space between history and legend where the truth can never be fully known. Finally, there is the prophecy of the minaret. In Damascus, there is a saying, when the minaret of the bride falls, a great calamity will befall the Muslims. The minaret is part of the Umayyad Mosque, one of the oldest and most beautiful mosques in the world. Saladin prayed there often, and shortly after his death, his empire did indeed collapse, fracturing into competing dynasties. Some believe this was inevitable, the result of succession disputes and external pressures. Others see it as a spiritual judgment, a sign that Saladin's righteousness was so great that after him, decline was unavoidable. The minaret still stands, and in its shadow, Saladin's tomb reminds visitors that even legends turn to dust. But the stories do not die. They grow, evolve, become part of the collective memory of a civilization. And maybe that is the greatest mystery of all, how a man becomes a legend, how flesh and blood transforms into symbol, how the Kurdish warrior from Tikrit, who ate barley bread and slept on a simple mat, who doubted himself and cried before battles, becomes Saladin the Magnificent, Saladin the Merciful, Saladin the Sword of Islam. The answer, perhaps, lies not in the secrets we do not know, but in the truth we do, that Saladin lived as he believed, that he could have been a tyrant but chose to be just, that he could have been a conqueror but chose to be a unifier, that he could have been cruel but chose to be merciful, and that in a brutal age, in a world of endless war, he dared to believe that righteousness still mattered. That belief, more than any sword or treasure, is what survives. Segment 4. Power, Glory, and the World They Left Behind. Let us speak now of kings. While Saladin lived his life in camps and on battlefields, sleeping in tents and eating soldiers' rations, there were men who lived very differently. In the great courts of the 12th century, in Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad, Constantinople, Jerusalem, power was expressed not through self-denial but through overwhelming display. Golden thrones, silk robes, feasts that lasted for days. A single banquet for a visiting dignitary might consume more wealth than a common soldier would see in a lifetime. The Fatimid caliphs, before Saladin ended their dynasty, lived in palaces that seemed designed to prove that heaven existed on earth. The Grand Palace of Cairo sprawled across acres, its walls decorated with carved marble and mosaics that caught the light like trapped stars. The caliph would sit behind curtains of pure gold thread, invisible to petitioners, his voice emerging as if from the mouth of God himself. Servants numbered in the thousands. The royal library contained over 2 million books, the largest collection in the world. And yet, this same caliph was a prisoner, controlled by his viziers, powerless to stop Saladin from dismantling everything his ancestors had built. Contrast this with how Saladin lived. Even after he became sultan, even after he controlled an empire, his habits remained simple. He wore plain robes. He ate modest meals. When his officials prepared lavish banquets for visiting dignitaries, Saladin would participate out of diplomatic necessity, but those who knew him reported that he seemed uncomfortable, eager for the ceremony to end so he could return to business. His treasurer once calculated that Saladin personally owned almost nothing. His clothes, his weapons, a few books, that was all. Everything else belonged to the state. And even the state's wealth was constantly flowing out, spent on armies, fortifications, charity. It drove his administrators to despair. How could they run an empire when the Sultan gave away gold faster than the tax collectors could bring it in? But this was Saladin's vision. He believed that power was not for accumulation, but for purpose. And his purpose was jihad, not the violent caricature that modern extremists invoke, but the classical Islamic concept of striving, of struggle in the path of righteousness. For Saladin, this meant uniting the Muslim world and defending it against aggression. Everything else was secondary. The irony is that while Saladin lived simply, the world he created was magnificent. After the liberation of Jerusalem, the city transformed. Saladin ordered the Dome of the Rock, the golden shrine from which Muhammad ascended to heaven, to be cleaned and restored. The rock itself, which had been covered by Christian alterations, was returned to its original state. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Crusaders had converted into a royal palace and stable, was purified with rosewater carried all the way from Damascus. The streets were rebuilt. Schools and hospitals were established. Jerusalem became once again what it had been centuries before, a jewel of Islamic civilization. But Saladin himself rarely stayed there. He preferred military camps, where he could be close to his soldiers, where the work was never finished. Power, for him, was not about sitting on a throne. It was about constant motion, constant effort, constant vigilance. Meanwhile, the Crusader states that survived his conquests told themselves a different story. They did not see Saladin as a hero. They saw him as the great adversary, the Muslim Sultan who had humiliated Christendom. And yet, even they could not deny his honor. The chroniclers of the Third Crusade, writing for Christian audiences, described Saladin as a noble pagan, a warrior who kept his word even when it disadvantaged him. There is a famous story from the Siege of Acre during the Third Crusade. Richard the Lionheart's army was dying of disease. Food was scarce. Morale was collapsing. Richard himself fell desperately ill with fever. And Saladin, his enemy, sent him fresh fruit, snow from the mountains to cool his fever, and his personal physician. When Saladin's advisors questioned this generosity, he reportedly replied, "If Richard dies of disease, history will say I could not defeat him in battle. When he recovers, I will beat him with honor." Richard did recover, and the two armies continued to slaughter each other for months. But the gesture was remembered. The Third Crusade ended in stalemate. Richard recaptured some coastal cities, but could not take Jerusalem. Saladin held the Holy City, but could not drive the Crusaders from the coast. After 3 years of exhausting warfare, both sides agreed to a truce. Christians would be allowed to visit Jerusalem as pilgrims. Muslims would keep control of the city. The Crusader kingdom would survive in a diminished form along the coast. Nobody won. Nobody lost. Both sides simply ran out of strength. Saladin returned to Damascus in September 1192, physically broken. He was 54 years old, but looked ancient. Years of warfare, poor diet, stress, and disease had ravaged his body. He had fevers, pain in his joints, exhaustion so deep that he sometimes fell asleep during meetings. But he refused to rest. There were always problems to solve, disputes to settle, plans to make for the next campaign. On February 19, 1193, after riding in the rain to welcome pilgrims returning from Mecca, Saladin fell ill with a fever. Within days, it became clear that this was not a minor sickness. He grew delirious. His doctors tried everything: herbs, bloodletting, prayers, but nothing worked. His family gathered around his bedside. And on March 3, 1193, Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, the man who had united an empire and reclaimed Jerusalem, died. They found 3 coins in his treasury. Not 3 chests. Not 3 bags. 3 coins. That was all the wealth the Sultan of Egypt and Syria had left. His funeral was attended by thousands. Muslims wept in the streets of Damascus. Even some Christians mourned, recognizing that whatever else Saladin had been, he had been a man of honor in an age when honor was rare. He was buried next to the Umayyad Mosque, and poets began composing verses that would be recited for centuries. But the empire did not survive him. Within weeks, his sons and brothers began to fight over the inheritance. The unity Saladin had built through 2 decades of relentless effort shattered almost overnight. Egypt went to one son, Damascus to another, Aleppo to a third. The lesser cities were divided among brothers, nephews, generals, and all of them immediately began scheming against each other, making deals with the Crusaders, fighting wars over scraps of territory. The Ayyubid dynasty, named after Saladin's father, would last for another 60 years. But it was a pale shadow of what Saladin had created. The empire fragmented. The dream of unity died. And in 1250, the dynasty itself was overthrown by the Mamluks, the slave soldiers who had been the backbone of Saladin's army, who decided they no longer needed sultans born to privilege. They would rule themselves. Jerusalem would change hands several more times over the centuries. The Mamluks would hold it. The Ottomans would take it. The British would conquer it. The modern state of Israel would claim it. And today, it remains the most contested city on earth, holy to 3 religions, belonging fully to none, its status still unresolved nearly 1,000 years after Saladin walked through its gates. But Saladin's legacy did not die. In the centuries after his death, Muslim scholars and rulers held him up as the ideal, the just sultan, the pious warrior, the man who put faith above wealth. His name became synonymous with resistance against foreign invasion and with the possibility that power could be used righteously. When nationalist movements arose in the 20th century, fighting against European colonialism, they invoked Saladin. When Arab leaders sought to unite their people, they compared themselves to him. For better or worse, Saladin became the symbol of a certain kind of Muslim leadership, strong but just, victorious but merciful, powerful but humble. The Crusaders, too, remembered him. In medieval European literature, Saladin appears again and again, not as a villain but as a noble adversary. Dante, writing his Divine Comedy a century after Saladin's death, placed him in limbo rather than hell, the highest honor a Christian poet could give a non-Christian. Stories circulated that Saladin had secretly admired Christianity, that he had been baptized on his deathbed, that he had been a good pagan, who would surely have converted if only he had lived longer. None of this was true, of course, but it revealed something important. Even his enemies could not bring themselves to fully hate him. In modern times, statues of Saladin stand in Damascus, in Cairo, in cities across the Middle East. Hospitals, schools, and streets bear his name. Movies and novels tell his story. He has become a cultural touchstone, a figure who transcends history and enters the realm of legend. And yet, the man himself remains elusive. We have chronicles written by his admirers. We have accounts from his enemies. We have letters and administrative documents. But the inner life of Saladin, his doubts, his fears, his private thoughts, remain largely hidden. Did he ever regret the years of war? Did he mourn the Muslim soldiers who died fighting other Muslims in his wars of unification? Did he wonder if the price of his righteousness was too high? We know he wept. Chroniclers record multiple occasions when Saladin broke down in tears, before battles, after victories, when hearing news of tragedies. He was not made of stone, and perhaps that is the most important thing to remember. Not the legend, but the man. The boy from Tikrit who did not want to go to Egypt. The young officer who learned to lead through trial and error. The Sultan who chose mercy when vengeance would have been easier. In the end, Saladin's greatest legacy might not be the cities he conquered or the battles he won. It might be the simple fact that he proved something many people in his age, and in ours, find hard to believe, that it is possible to have power and not be corrupted by it, to win wars and still show mercy, to be feared and still be just. 3 coins in his treasury, a tomb in Damascus, and a name that will never be forgotten. That is what remains of the Kurdish warrior who became the champion of Islam. And perhaps, in a world that so often rewards cruelty and punishes kindness, that is enough.